You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 5th of September 2024 on Monocle Radio.
It's 1 a.m. in Beijing, 2000 in Istanbul, 1800 here in London and 1300 in Caracas. That's the time on Monocle Radio, brought to you by Chanel Watches. France has a new prime minister, but for how long? Russia gets rumbled again, trying to influence a US presidential election. And Christmas comes early, actually, if not metaphorically, in Venezuela. I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. My guests Robin Lustig and Nina dos Santos will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from Alina Frolova, now Deputy Chair of Ukraine's Centre for Defence Strategies, formerly Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defence. Can Ukraine still win? Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I am joined today by Robin Lustig, the journalist and broadcaster, former presenter of The World Tonight on Radio 4, and Nina dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent and former CNN Europe editor. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Robin, you either have been or are about to go, I forget which, and I don't suppose it matters because you've probably been there before anyway, to Norfolk.
Norfolk in eastern England. Yes, I have been there before, and I am going next week on my holiday. I go to the most exotic places in the world.
How would you sum up the appeal of Norfolk to listeners who may be Norfolk curious?
Well, it's the seaside. It's on the North Sea. Very pretty countryside. Lots of excellent country pubs serving excellent beer and food. Lovely walks along the salt flats, bird sanctuaries, peaceful, quiet, all the things I didn't do as a foreign correspondent.
Pretty countryside, though, really, because it is popularly known, Norfolk, certainly in the English consciousness, as a place where, how to put it, the squadron leader of the local mountain rescue service is not overly taxed.
Very flat, Norfolk, as an old coward once said. Yeah, it is very... But that means very big horizons, so you can see a very long way. It's peaceful, it's restful, it's good for the soul.
Sounds all right, actually. Compare and contrast, Nina, with Portugal, which, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure bits of it are flat, but it's not really what you most...
Not that much of it is,
Not that much of it.
Certainly not Lisbon.
No, for sure, or even further south, or, go to Madeira, and definitely not flat there. I'm a bit of a migratory bird. I'm not such a fan of when the weather turns here in the UK. It's been pouring with rain today. I'm praying for you to have sunshine, Robin.
That's very kind of you. Your prayers will be much needed.
We will be starting, however, in France, which is near Portugal. Well, it's not really near Portugal. It's nearer to Portugal than where we are now. In fact, it might not be. People forget. Anyway, I digress. Portugal, it's on the same time zone as the UK.
It is, because it's very far west.
Exactly. But we will start in France, which after some weeks of post-election faffery with a break for the Olympics, has a new prime minister, though hardly a new face. President Emmanuel Macron has sent for Michel Barnier, former Minister for Foreign Affairs, Agriculture and various other stuff, a European Commissioner for the Internal Market, and more recently employed sighing gallically at Brexiter Brits as they attempted to ram the square peg of Brexit into the round hole of verifiable reality. It now falls to Barnier, who is generally reckoned on the centre-right-ish of French politics, to try and assemble a viable government from three riotously disparate parliamentary blocs, an endeavour with which one can only wish him well. Nina, to you...
Splendid, by the way.
Nina, to you, first of all, you have the advantage at this table of having met Michel Barnier. Is he capable of rising to this challenge?
Well, look, the first time I met Michel Barnier was in the early 2000s as a young journalist, when we were in the thick of the Second Iraq War, which I believe you actually covered in places like Baghdad. And you'll remember, both of you actually, this incident when there were a couple of French journalists who were kidnapped by Al-Qaeda. And the first time I met Barnier was when he had just flown in from, I think it was a skirmish that was taking place in the Côte d'Ivoire, in the Ivory Coast. And he was the Foreign Affairs Minister. And he'd flown in for this press conference to talk about these two journalists, and he was totally unruffled, very elegant. He was 5 minutes late, but he said, "I'm really sorry, I've been dealing with this difficult situation over in Francophone Africa and trying to help sort that out. Now I'm totally focused on freeing these two hostages," which, by the way, the French managed to do. Contrast that with his counterpart, Franco Frattini and Silvio Berlusconi of Italy, who are also trying to negotiate the release of their hostages at the same time. And Berlusconi, who had no such excuse, arrived half an hour late. I think I might have told you about this anecdote before, Andrew, where his aide immediately before addressing the media...
It's the greatest hit.
Sprayed his head brown, his bald pate brown, in front of a rather bemused Michel Barnier, who immediately got down to serious stuff. So I think... And then I witnessed his... negotiating over Brexit for years in Brussels as well. He's very good at being charming but meticulously serious at the same time. And so I wonder whether basically what Emmanuel Macron has done here is try to find somebody who's got a technocratic footprint, who's neutral enough, but also has been on the front line of French politics a generation or so ago, where many of the young people who are voting for the far right won't remember these kind of anecdotes. And he'll be palatable enough for the three parties, essentially, or the three-way political split that they're going to have to try and navigate with this vote of confidence you have to first get through in the French Parliament.
Robin, so he's charming and serious and unruffled, even as Silvio Berlusconi is having his spray-on syrup applied. But nonetheless, is he basically at this point the all-else-has-failed candidate? Because I cannot imagine, understanding what I do of President Macron, that he was entirely delighted by having to appoint a Prime Minister who might be nearly as recognisable as he is.
Well, I'm not sure that Monsieur Barnier is as recognisable in France, actually.
True enough.
Because much of his most recent career, as Nina was saying, has been in an EU context. If I were a French voter who had voted either for one of the parties on the far right or one of the parties on the far left, because I was mightily fed up with the establishment parties, I would be extremely unimpressed by the appointment of Michel Barnier, who is the epitome of an establishment politician.
And he's also conservative as well, isn't he?
And conservative, yeah. You vote either for the far left or for the far right, and you end up with Mr. Senator Right. That's not what I wanted. The other thing to be said about Monsieur Barnier, because we now live in an age where age becomes an issue in politics, thanks to Mr. Trump, Monsieur Barnier is more than twice as old as his predecessor, Monsieur Attal, who was the youngest ever French Prime Minister at 34. Monsieur Barnier, if he actually makes it through the vote of confidence and it becomes Prime Minister, is 73. Which is the oldest ever French Prime Minister. So there's something to chew on.
Yeah, I'm actually not all that unhappy about that, Nina, because I have arrived at the age at which it does occasionally occur that people are put in charge of entire countries who are younger than I am, and frankly, it makes me extremely unhappy.
Happens to me as well, depending on the country.
I should keep quiet.
But Nina, if the whole point, going back to Macron's calling of this early election, which baffled a great many people, was to try and cut the far right, i.e. the National Rally, off at the knees, does it look like he might actually have succeeded if that's what he set out to do?
I'm not sure. Well, their initial response towards Barnier is actually quite interesting and quite telling, because they've said, we're not going to get in bed with Barnier and form a government, but we haven't said that we're going to oppose him either. They've said, we'll just sit back and see what he puts on the table and see which compromises he's willing to make when it comes to the future budget negotiations. Now, if he can get through that vote of confidence, the first immediate hurdle that France has to deal with coming up on October the 1st is to have Parliament pass the French budget. And so the National Rally here is sort of, I think they're kind of mollifying their stance a bit in comparison to France Unbowed, who are saying, look, this is a fossil, a dinosaur politician. He is, Robin was just pointing out, isn't from the political background that people have voted for. And, you know, they've just completely dismissed that. So
But I think that reaction of the National Rally explains why President Macron went for Monsieur Barnier, because it does seem to me that they are giving him a sort of an amber light, if not a green light, and that Monsieur Macron must be relatively confident that they will give Michel Barnier, at least in the opening months, a fair wind. And that's why almost certainly he will get the job.
And remember that actually just 6 days ago, over the course of, I think, or maybe it's even 4 days ago, right at the start of this week or during the last weekend, you saw members of the National Rally ushered in through the back door of the Élysée Palace to have these specific talks with Macron. And probably the theory you're laying out, Robin, might have been what was in the back of everybody's mind, if not on the discussion table, I'd have suspected.
Just finally on this, Robin, as you were alluding to earlier, he is probably better recognised, Michel Barnier, that is in the United Kingdom than in France. I mean, just hypothetically, though, how much funnier would this have been if Macron had appointed him Prime Minister while the Conservatives were still in charge here?
Oh, that would have been wonderful. Can you just imagine, Brexiteer Rishi Sunak having to discuss with EU negotiator Michel Barnier? It would have been delicious. Even better, I suppose, if Boris Johnson had found himself negotiating with Michel Barnier, not as an EU leader, but as a French leader. Yeah, the ironies are wonderful.
But it's still significant, though, just if I may, because obviously we had a ship go down in the Channel just the other day. Lives were lost, sadly. And France, yet again, is trying to use the fact that Keir Starmer, for the new government here in the UK, is trying to get some kind of post-Brexit migration deal. Barnier, if he's the Prime Minister, he's going to play hardball on that because he knows where the weak points are for the UK that he'll be willing to negotiate on.
Well, we will, of course, come back to this, assuming Michel Barnier survives those first votes of confidence. But let's look now at the United States, where not for the first time in recent history, it is being suggested that a Russian thumb is being applied to the scales ahead of an American presidential election. The US has filed charges and imposed sanctions against several Russian media executives and media outlets, accusing them of, among other things, funneling money through a Tennessee-based company associated with an assortment of bewilderingly popular American culture war bloviators of pro-Russian sympathies who have spent today issuing tear-stained communiques to the effect that they are merely credulous and stupid rather than actively treacherous and stupid. I paraphrase slightly. Robin, where would you rate your level of surprise?
Well, no level of surprise at the allegations being made, a certain level of surprise at the amount of evidence that the prosecutors seem to have come up with.
It's quite compelling.
Yeah, one shouldn't prejudge these cases, of course, but it does look as if they've got them banged to rights. They've got quite a good trail of where the websites have been registered, where the money has come from. This is quite good stuff. I mean, I use the word good, meaning from the prosecutor's point of view. We shall see whether or not it makes any difference. I think it has long been accepted that there has been Russian interference in American elections and indeed in other elections. Nothing unique about what seems to have been going on there. But this is, I think, if not the most serious, one of the most serious examples of where one country has been able to say, we know what you're up to, Mr. Putin, because we've got the evidence to show.
Has anybody here ever been offered a sack of Russian cash to pivot to anti-Ukraine talking points?
Not me.
No. Has anybody ever admitted to anything like that?
No, I mean, obviously the answer would be no, but I'm almost disappointed that nobody's even asked. Nina, the company concerned has not been specifically named in the judgment, but American media have connected the dots and said it is almost certainly an outfit called Tenet Media, a sort of content farm based in Tennessee. Scrolling through other recent guests on some of their shows, one finds names up to and including Vivek Ramaswamy, Kari Lake, Lara Trump. I mean, pretty much the entire dingbat wing of the Republican Party. Do we start to suspect that there might be a fair bit more where this came from, i.e. Russian flamming up of the American far right?
Well, all of these people are saying that they believe they were victims themselves of this disinformation campaign, that, their messages have been completely overblown. But the concern here is the manipulation, that this is a sort of coordinated effect using all these different recognisable characters to, in a very subtle manner, a more subtle manner than we saw in 2016. This is the crucial thing. Use recognisable faces to just plant the seed of doubt in there and let it germinate, and also plant the seed for Trump, because this is what the indictment says, is that these these organisations were working essentially to try and support Donald Trump's candidacy. Obviously, there's no suggestion that he knew that, but the point is
not much suggestion he knows anything, in fairness.
Well, yes, you did point that out, actually, at the start of the show, so full caveat, fully caveated there, I suppose, Andrew. But the whole point here is that it's quite different to 2016, where you were talking about sort of anonymous bots that were using the fact that people finally thought that they had a voice, that they were creating their own ecosystem. That they were, they had found some conspiratorial piece of information that the mass mainstream media hadn't been covering and deliberately had been avoiding covering. Now this is a very different pattern. We're talking about recognisable figures who all say the same thing, who are all allied to a particular political agenda, who they appear to have dropped this messaging in on. And what's so crucial about all of this is that actually to undermine democracy and interfere with it, you don't have to get people to believe one thing. You just have to get people who are recognisable enough to get you to believe that you don't know what to believe anymore. Mm-hmm. And then you can manipulate people's minds.
You muddy the water, you sow doubt, exactly.
Yeah.
But this brings me to the question which I do always wonder about when stories like this emerge, Robin, the degree to which we should blame not the manipulators or the manipulated, i.e. these media outlets who claim that they don't understand that there've been a Russian front operation. At what point do we start blaming the audiences and indeed the voters? Because none of this stuff sticks if people don't decide to believe it.
It's very problematic, this. I mean, until relatively recently, there was a media environment in which people chose to believe what now is known as the mainstream media, the established brands in this country, obviously.
Which obviously was an arrangement not without problems of its own.
Absolutely so. And if you go back even further, if you go back to the days of the Cold War, you had, for example, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, which were funded by the Americans, aimed at Eastern Europe, behind the Iron Curtain, in order to destabilize those countries. This is not new. What is new is that the way in which online media technology now works is it's much easier to do, it's much more difficult to detect. Nobody was ever in any doubt who was funding Radio Free Europe or Radio Liberty, but there is now real doubt as to who is funding and why all this plethora of TikTok accounts, Instagram accounts, whatever it might be. And so it sows doubt, it sows distrust in the whole process. People don't know what to believe. They end up not believing anything. And that's dangerous.
And it torpedoes the business model of those established news brands that in some countries, like here in the UK, are regulated. And I'd argue that broadcasters not being regulated and social media companies not being regulated as publishers in America has played a huge role in where we've come to today.
Yep. Which is a topic we have discussed on these shows and doubtless will again. But just finally on this, Nina, we have seen announced by Attorney General Merrick Garland these measures that are going to be imposed and doubtless further measures are coming. But do we have any faith at all that these will be more powerful than people's desire/willingness to believe what they would prefer to believe?
Well, as I said, it goes back to the fact that, we're bringing up generations of people who don't know what they believe in. It's the institutions and it's not just the institution of, the media. It's the incredible media outlets. It's the institutions, are very democratic institutions, including, for instance, if you look at some countries in Eastern Europe, people don't know whether to believe the judiciary. This is actually is probably the second most important indictment we've seen on allegations of Russian interference by the Department of Justice under Biden's administration. And of course, there will be a lot of people in America who will say this is politically motivated. Yeah. This is coming 1 week ahead of the big head-to-head debate that's set to take place. It's coming just a day after a big CNN poll yesterday showed that Kamala Harris was ahead in 4 of the 6 key battleground states. I might add, I suspect, given the fact that Russia has now said that they're planning on retaliating against US media outlets, that the Department of Justice and the Biden administration wanted absolutely to secure the freedom of Evan Gershkovich before they went ahead with this type of indictment. But the crucial thing is, as I said, it's all about undermining all the different institutions, including the judiciary. And so you can imagine there's going to be some pushback from the right against this indictment.
Well, to Venezuela now, where President, and listeners may put their own inverted commas around, President Nicolas Maduro has made the interesting decision to join the likes of Maximilian Robespierre and Pol Pot in taking sweeping liberties with the calendar. While President Maduro has not, in fairness, done any proper Mad King stuff like renaming any months after his favourite hat or declaring a national holiday in honour of the heron, though he does have a fresh term in front of him, so who knows, he has munificently announced that this year Christmas will be brought forward to October 1st. Robin, doubt obtains about whether he means Christmas Day will literally be on October 1st, not December 25th, or whether Christmas sort of general season will start October 1st, in which case, certainly by British standards, he's starting quite late. But I'm broadly in favour of this, I think, on the grounds that, get it over with.
Wow, yeah, but you won't get it over with. He seems to be envisaging a 3-month Christmas. I think he said he wants Christmas.
That's what we have here.
Well, pretty much. Christmas will start, I think, on October the 1st is what he said. Look, I mean, anything to try to take people's minds off the fact that he's stolen an election.
He has done this before, to be clear, stolen elections and tried to move Christmas forward.
Yeah, It's a wonderful example of a politician trying to change the narrative, as the media analysts like to say these days. He wants to get people talking about anything other than the way in which he stole an election result from the rightful winner. And so if they talk about is it Christmas or is it not Christmas, then that's a gain for him.
I mean, do we once again have to consider the possibility, Nina, and it does seem where Maduro is concerned, the simplest explanation that fits a lot of the facts, that he may not have both oars in the water?
What does not having both oars in the water mean? Apologies. You're really on fire today, Andrew. I'm trying my best to keep up with all of the colourful language. Does that mean he's not altogether there?
Yeah, stray sheep in the top paddock, etc.
Wonderful. I mean, obviously the church is against this, which is important.
They are. The churches are not printing new calendars at this late stage, no.
No, indeed. And I think, as somebody who, sympathises with your concern about the lengthy run-up to the Christmas period, particularly when it comes to sort of merchandise flooding British stores, the sadness is that Venezuelans are just getting poorer and poorer half of the time. They're extremely concerned about whether or not they can just put food on the table amid rampant inflation, let alone exercise their democratic right to hope one day to be a democratic country again. And so him bringing Christmas forward at a time when nobody can save for it, nobody's feeling particularly happy about it. Yeah, I think it's just a ruse that's going to fool nobody, really.
Robin, Nina has identified the key grotesquerie of this whole thing, which is that there is absolutely no earthly reason why Venezuela should not be a monstrously wealthy, extremely prosperous, secure and happy country. It sits on the largest oil reserves of any country on earth. And Maduro, as Chavez before him, has been almost imaginative in how they've gone about bankrupting it. And yet there he still is. At this point, is there anything, though, that any outside player can actually usefully do in order to edge Maduro towards the door?
If only. The Americans have a great track record of trying to interfere in the politics of many countries to the south of them, the whole of South America at various points. I mean, Hugo Chavez made a whole career out of the fact that the Americans serially tried to get rid of him. I had the pleasure of interviewing him once for over an hour, and all he would talk about was how
many words did you say in that hour? 7 or 8?
Well, he was actually extraordinarily well behaved. I don't know why, but he was. However, be that as it may, no, I mean, the people of Venezuela have been traduced for many, many years by the most appalling political leaders. As Nina says, they are in the most terrible state. And the idea that somehow their problems can be solved by messing around with when Christmas is or isn't is grotesque. I suspect this will do him absolutely no good at all, but he is there, and I'm by no means sure that anybody can do much about it other than the Venezuelans themselves.
I mean, one thing, just before we move off this, which has been done in recent days, Nina, is that the United States have impounded his presidential jet, which means that next time he can find anywhere willing to have him, he may have to fly commercial. Or
Russian
cargo. or Russian cargo. But that seems almost a gesture of the US's own futility, really, doesn't it? It's not like it's not an especially massive gesture.
No, they haven't put up much of a fight really this time, have they? There's a sense of sort of quiet resignation, I think, in Washington, and also what will concern them is the arrest of his opponent now, just over the last couple of days, and that's another one of the things that he's probably trying to detract from, but. Yeah, it's very similar to the situation we've seen actually in Belarus, where I remember being at various sort of summits where US diplomats would quietly sort of acknowledge there's not a huge amount we can do now. And that's really concerning because if you're seeing some of the political opposition leaders who are in jail in Belarus, one of them is almost starving to death. You have to wonder what the fate is of a political opponent who goes up against Nicolas Maduro and whether they're helped by the United States or not. It's such a huge risk and it might not make any difference at all.
Well, there are few cities on earth more worth visiting than Istanbul, a city whose tumultuous history is abundantly represented in the glorious architectural marvels and sensational museums huddled on the eastern shore of Europe and the western edge of Asia. And yet, it turns out, possibly as a symptom of the insufferably whimsical nature of much social media discourse, that the highest-rated tourist attraction in Istanbul is a dog, specifically a lumbering stray mutt known as the Boulder, currently boasting a better Google reviews average than the Hagia Sophia. Robin, I don't know when you were last in Istanbul. I was thinking back, probably for me, about 2017-18. To the best of my recollection, I did not see this dog.
No, I didn't either. It's one of my favourite cities on earth. It contains one of my favourite buildings on earth, the Hagia Sophia. I absolutely love Istanbul. I have my doubts about this particular story.
Surely not.
Yeah, I made the mistake of looking at some of the supposed Google reviews of the wonders of this Istanbul mutt, and they don't appear to have been written by human beings. However, be that as it may...
But do you think they were written by other dogs?
Or people in Tennessee.
I'm
much more prone to believe they were written by people in Tennessee, or people pretending to be in Tennessee. Anyway, look, Istanbul is a wonderful city. People should visit it for all kinds of different reasons. The presence of many stray dogs, one of them apparently called the Boulder, is not one of the highest items on my list of reasons to visit the city.
I did quite like the stray cats. There's a lot of those as well. And the shops in Istanbul do make kind of a fuss of them. They leave out food and milk and so on.
But then they're not the size of the Boulder.
Well, no,
huge.
I mean, but like dogs are generally bigger than cats. I mean, the dog has an unfair advantage. He's a dog.
There is one other country I know of which has a very serious, or did have a very serious, stray dog problem. And here I am really dropping names of places I've been privileged enough to visit. Bhutan in the Himalayas.
Really?
Because it's a Buddhist kingdom, does not believe in killing animals. Therefore has huge numbers of stray dogs. And one of my abiding memories of trying to sleep in the capital, Thimphu, is being kept awake by the barking of stray dogs all night. What they have done over the last few years is sterilise hundreds of thousands of stray dogs, which has helped to reduce the numbers on the streets. Stray dogs are a menace. They can be dangerous. They can spread disease. I understand why some people in Istanbul are very unhappy that there are too many dogs. There is a programme now to deal with that. The story about the Boulder, this famous tourist attraction, may be designed to divert people's attention from the government's intention to do away with an awful lot of other dogs.
I can seamlessly reveal, Nina, that there are no plans, as far as I am aware, for the Boulder to appear at Monocle's Quality of Life conference, which is being held in Istanbul in October. Tickets are available at conference.monocle.com. I mean, that's not actually the reason we put this story in the running order, I don't think. I just go where I'm pointed.
Because it has legs. That's why he did it.
It's kind of a happy accident. But Nina, I will put to you the same question I put to Robin, or a variation on it. If you have recently been in Istanbul, did you seek this animal out? If you were shortly going to Istanbul, would you?
Look, last time I went again was about, as you said, sort of 2018, 2019 time. So probably the boulder, given the tough life he's had, wasn't alive at that time. I don't remember that many stray dogs in Istanbul all those years ago. Well, actually, quite recently, up until 2018, 2019. A place I do remember a lot of these Anatolian sort of mongrel dogs is Ankara. Because obviously there's lots and lots of farmland and pasture land around there. They do seem quite friendly, considering their size. But I've been a dog owner in years gone by. I am quite nervous when I go past I've been in Indonesia and seen similar situations where you have packs of dogs, or even in the Pampas in Argentina, and you're on a horse and you get these packs of stray dogs that suddenly start snapping at the heels of a horse. It's quite scary, actually.
I did once visit a breeder of Anatolian sheepdogs deep in the hills of Anatolia, and they are the biggest dogs I've ever seen in my life. They are absolutely gigantic, bigger than a Great Dane, bigger than anything else, very popular apparently among Arab sheikhs who like using them as almost, the way the potentates of the past had pet lions, they have pet Anatolian sheepdogs to scare the living daylights out of their guests. But I didn't see any in Istanbul, it has to be said.
I'm surprised Vladimir Putin hasn't adopted one
The biggest stray dogs I have ever seen, for reasons I do not entirely comprehend, are in Delphi in Greece, which is overrun with absolutely enormous dogs. And when I was there in April for the Delphi Economic Forum, one of them just lumbered into the venue, the floor all but shaking as he walked, lay down on the cool tiles in the lobby, and attempts were made to move him, which were unsuccessful because he was absolutely immense. So it was just sort of generally decided by all the potentates present that the conference would just have to go on around him. So it did.
Quite right, too.
But moving seamlessly from that conference to another entirely, and Nina dos Santos and Robin Lustig, thank you for joining us. This Saturday's edition of The Foreign Desk was recorded last weekend at the Globsec Forum in Prague, and we will be hearing in that episode from, among others, Ukraine's former Defence Minister Alexei Reznikov. But we also spoke to a former Deputy Ukrainian Defence Minister, Alina Frolova, now Deputy Chair of the think tank Centre for Defence Strategies. And I began by asking Alina if a total victory for Ukraine, retaking Crimea and all of the Donbass, was still possible.
Yes, and most of Ukrainians are sure about that. The issue is in time and resources we will put. And why we are so sure? Because actually this is the historical opportunity for us to break this, round of the whole total destruction of Ukrainian nation as a nation. And we do understand, shouldn't we use this chance? We will come to next war quite soon, and this would be a very bad result. So for us, this is like a no option choice, actually. So, and the issue is in resources, the issue is in people we will lose, and time, of course. Yes, time is very important.
But those questions of time and resources, especially human resources, how do you adjust for the fact that there's almost no imaginable way you can compete with Russia, both in terms of just sheer numbers of people and also in terms of Russia's current and historical willingness to throw away its people? There's clearly a different measure of regard for the safety of troops and people on the two sides.
Well, in the history, we had a lot of examples when small nations won the war against the bigger nations. And this is actually the questions which we hear from the very beginning. But it's already 2.5 years, and we're still here, and we're still fighting, and we're still successful in many cases in fighting that. So I think that we are not the country of 2 million people. We still, with all the loss of population of everything, we're still around 30. And this is not small amount. But we do understand, of course, then in symmetric fighting, we will lose, because what's happening in Pokrovsk, this is a very good example of how you can lose just because of number of people. So we need to make asymmetric actions, and actually this night attack, like around 160 drones sent to Russia. And Kursk, this is the example, or Black Sea, this is all the example of asymmetric warfare. And the Black Sea is not influencing directly on the land front line, but it influencing on the course of war, how it happened. So it shouldn't be like a people against people or infantry against infantry. We have a lot of different choices how to do it.
It's obviously not a question for now because there is still a war to be won. But do you think ahead to what, certainly in terms of its defensive capabilities, what kind of country Ukraine is going to have to be after this? Do you see the future of Ukraine being a very heavily militarized, very heavily defended country, and that's just going to have to be the reality of living next door to Russia?
Yeah. Short answer, yes, which is not bad, I would say, because neglecting this position, neglecting this like a reality for Ukraine just come to this war. And we shouldn't neglect it. We should understand that at least our border, and we have huge border with Russia, Belarus, that the border should be quite well protected, that many cities, including big cities, will change their economic model because, for example, Kharkiv is not anymore a good city for defense production, but it's a good city for locating the huge number of troops. So that would change the region by itself. And I think that total militarization and total resilience is something which we need to have, because you saw that actually the aggression in 2022 was broken because of total resilience. But people didn't have a weapon at that time and they didn't have special skills. So I think that that's the model we can build up, which does not exclude the huge economic development in Ukraine, because we have very well-educated people. We have this entrepreneurship in our blood, and this is the national character, let's say. And we are quite risky in doing business, so we are ready to start up in just like a very difficult position like war, for example. And I think that all that will create a very good background for restoration and economic growth afterwards.
That was Alina Frolova, Deputy Chair of the Centre for Defence Strategies, former Deputy Ukrainian Defence Minister. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Robin Lustig and Nina Dos Santos. The show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Gunnar Gronlid and Sana Jumani. Our sound engineer was Sarah Nichol. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily returns at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
"2024 is a pivotal year for global politics. Meanwhile, conflict, climate change, and AI dominate the headlines. What do these global stories mean for you? The Financial Times offers fearless thinking in defining moments. Its trusted journalists deliver impartial analysis on the world's biggest news events, helping you to form your own bold opinions. Start reading the Financial Times at ft.com.